Imagine being forced to sit on a chamber pot in the middle of a town square during the deadliest winter in living memory, while hundreds of people throw rotten eggs, frozen mud, and animal waste at your face. Now imagine enduring that for 6 hours straight as your body slowly freezes to death. Sound impossible? That's exactly what they tried to do to me. And here's the shocking part: I survived. But what happened during those 6 hours changed me into something they could never break. My name is Alara, and this is the true story of how medieval England's most humiliating punishment turned me from a silenced woman into an unbreakable force. This happened in the winter of 1645 in the town of Oakhaven, where snow piled so high against the houses that some families couldn't open their doors for days, where the wind howled down from the northern hills with such ferocity that it could strip the skin from your face, where people froze to death in their sleep, even inside their homes. This was the setting for my punishment. The Cucking Stool, a chair designed specifically to destroy a woman's spirit through public humiliation and exposure to the elements. But they made one critical mistake. They underestimated what the human spirit can endure when it has no choice but to become stronger than suffering itself. My crime? I spoke truth to power. Young Mary, barely 14 years old, was accused of stealing bread by Constable Blackwood, a man whose authority was built on intimidation and fear rather than justice. I presented evidence that proved her innocence, used simple logic that unraveled his hasty judgment. But in doing so, I committed the unforgivable sin. I made a powerful man look foolish in front of the town council. In medieval Oakhaven, a woman with an education was suspicious. A woman who could read and write was dangerous. But a woman who could argue with men and win? That was intolerable. They needed a label for women like me, and they found it in an old law. Common scold, a woman whose tongue was too sharp, whose mind was too quick, whose voice was too loud. The prescribed punishment was the Cucking Stool, a device designed not to kill quickly, but to break you slowly, publicly, shamefully. The morning they came for me, the sky was the color of old iron. Snow had been falling for 3 days straight, and the temperature had dropped so low that ravens were falling frozen from the trees. Blackwood arrived at my cottage door with 4 men, their breath creating clouds of steam in the frigid air. "Time to teach you your place, woman," he said with a smile that made my blood run cold, though soon enough, everything about me would be cold. But what was waiting for me in the town square was worse than anything I could have imagined. The Cucking Stool sat in the center of Oakhaven's market square like a throne designed by demons. It was a crude wooden chair, though. Calling it a chair is generous, mounted on a wooden frame for all to see. But here's the detail that made it truly diabolical. It was built to look like a commode, a chamber pot. The symbolism was deliberate and vicious. They weren't just punishing you, they were reducing you to human waste in the eyes of your community. The wood was dark with age, and stained with God knows what from previous victims. Iron restraints hung from the arms and legs. These weren't simple ropes that might show mercy. These were metal bands that would dig into your flesh as you inevitably struggled. The seat had holes in it designed to let the cold wind blow up through your clothing, maximizing your exposure to the elements. Every aspect of this device was engineered for maximum suffering and humiliation. As they marched me through the snow-covered streets, people emerged from their houses despite the brutal cold. Word had spread. The entire town was gathering not out of concern, but out of that dark human impulse that makes people slow down to watch accidents. Some carried baskets filled with rotten vegetables they'd been saving specifically for this moment. Others held chunks of frozen mud, pieces of coal, even animal waste. In winter, these projectiles became weapons hard as stone when frozen. The crowd was already jeering before I even reached the square. Do you understand what that does to a person? To see faces you've known your entire life twisted with cruelty? They strapped me into the Cucking Stool with methodical efficiency. The iron bands clamped around my wrists first, then my ankles, then a larger band across my chest that made it hard to breathe deeply. My back was forced against the rough wood, splinters digging through my clothes. The metal was so cold it burned, that strange phenomenon where extreme cold feels like fire against your skin. The position was deliberately uncomfortable. You couldn't slouch, couldn't shift your weight, couldn't find even a moment of relief. And remember, this was outdoors in the middle of winter. The temperature was well below freezing. Snow was falling steadily, and the wind was cutting through my clothes like knives made of ice. Blackwood stepped forward, positioning himself where the whole crowd could see him. "Elara of Oakhaven," he announced in that booming voice of his, "you have been found guilty of being a common scold, a woman who disturbs the peace with her wicked tongue and presumptuous mind. You will sit in this chair for 6 hours, from noon until the church bells ring for evening prayers. Let this be a lesson to all women who forget their place." The crowd roared its approval. And then it began. The first projectile, a rotten egg that had frozen solid, hit me square in the face. The impact was shocking, and the smell was worse. Then came another, and another. Frozen vegetables, clumps of mud hard as rock, pieces of coal that left dark bruises wherever they struck. Within minutes, I was covered in filth. But here's what they didn't anticipate. The humiliation was awful, yes, but the cold? The cold was the real killer. After the first hour, I stopped feeling the impacts. My face had gone numb. My fingers, locked in those iron restraints, had turned from white to blue. I couldn't feel my feet anymore. The wet filth that covered me was freezing into a shell, and I realized with growing horror that this was actually making the cold worse. Ice was forming in my hair, on my eyelashes, in the folds of my clothing. The crowd's enthusiasm was beginning to wane. Throwing things at someone who can barely react isn't as entertaining as they'd hoped, but they kept at it, almost out of obligation now. Some of the children were crying, though whether from cold or from finally understanding the cruelty of what they were witnessing, I couldn't tell. My body started to shake uncontrollably. This wasn't just shivering, this was my body's desperate attempt to generate heat through movement, but the iron restraints limited even that small mercy. I could feel my thoughts beginning to slow, becoming sluggish and thick like cold honey. This is hypothermia, I realized. This is how I die. Not from humiliation, but from the cold slowly shutting down my body, organ by organ. But then something strange happened. In that moment of absolute physical suffering, when my body was failing and the crowd's jeers had faded to a distant buzz, I found something. A small point of warmth deep inside my chest, somewhere the cold couldn't reach. Not a physical warmth, my body was freezing, but something else. Something that made me understand. They can hurt my body, but they cannot touch what I am. Have you ever discovered your strength in the place meant to destroy you? That's what was happening to me, right there in that chair of shame. The second hour was worse. The snow was falling harder now, thick flakes that stuck to everything. I was disappearing under a layer of white, becoming a snow-covered statue in the center of the square. My breathing had become shallow, each breath hurt, the cold air searing my lungs. Icicles were forming on my chin from my own frozen breath. This was a level of cold that people today, with their heated homes and winter clothing, cannot truly comprehend. Some of the crowd had given up and gone home. Even hatred has its limits when you're standing in a blizzard. But Blackwood remained, standing near a brazier someone had brought out for the officials, warming his hands while watching me freeze. The contrast was deliberate. Look how warm and comfortable the righteous are, while the wicked suffer. My mind was doing strange things now. I would drift away from the square, from my frozen body, and find myself in memories. I was a child again, learning to read by my father's fireside. I was 14, understanding for the first time that words had power. I was 20, arguing with the parish priest about theology and watching his face turn red with rage that I could quote scripture better than he could. Each memory was a small fire, keeping some part of me alive while my body slowly shut down. And I realized something profound. They thought they were punishing me for what I'd said, but they were actually terrified of what I represented. Proof that women could think, could reason, could be right when men were wrong. That understanding gave me something to hold on to. Something stronger than the cold. By the third hour, people were whispering. The town physician had approached Blackwood, speaking in urgent, low tones. I caught fragments. Too cold. Might die. Permanent damage. But Blackwood waved him away. The law said 6 hours, and 6 hours it would be. To show mercy now would be to admit the punishment was excessive. And Blackwood could never admit to being wrong, especially not after I'd proven him wrong about Mary. My body had stopped shaking. This is a bad sign, and I knew it. When you stop shivering in the cold, it means your body is giving up, conserving its last energy for vital organs. My speech was slurred when I tried to move my frozen lips. My vision was tunneling, dark edges creeping in from the sides. But here's what happened next, and this is the part that still gives me chills when I remember it. Through my dimming vision, I saw a small figure push through the crowd. It was Mary, the girl I'd defended. She was carrying something, a thick wool blanket. Before anyone could stop her, she ran forward and tried to throw it over my shoulders. Blackwood roared at her, yanking the blanket away. "She gets no comfort! That's the point!" But Mary stood her ground, this tiny 14-year-old girl facing down the most powerful man in town. "You're killing her," she screamed. "This isn't justice. This is murder." The crowd went silent, because she was right, and everyone knew it. The fourth hour brought a shift in the atmosphere. More people were speaking up now, muttering to each other. The women especially, they were looking at me with something new in their eyes. Not pity anymore, something harder. Recognition, maybe. Because they understood, if this could happen to me, it could happen to them. Any woman who spoke too freely, who thought too clearly, who forgot to make herself small and quiet. I was fading in and out of consciousness now. My heart rate had slowed to a dangerous crawl. Frostbite had set into my extremities. I would later lose parts of 3 toes, but I was still alive, still holding on to that small ember of warmth deep inside. It had grown somehow, fed by Mary's courage,